1941 CUDA graduate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, 1941.
Yes.
Did you play sports while you were in high school?
No, I didn't. Always thought I was too small.
Is that right?
But looking at the pictures over the years, there was some there just about, or even smaller than I was. But like I told you before, and we'll get to that later on, I worked after school, and so I didn't really have a way home to Mission City and that, so I didn't get involved in football. Although I was assistant manager for a couple of years. I did go that far with it, but I didn't play.
Now, you were born in New Smyrna, is that correct?
Yes, I was born up on Rush Street.
On Rush Street, not in a hospital.
No, you didn't do that in those days, you know.
Now, your mother and father came to New Smyrna Beach from where?
From Greenville, Florida. That's where her folks lived, and his folks also lived in the Greenville, Florida area, near, well, a little west of Madison, between Madison and Tallahassee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, your father worked for the railroad?
Yes, he came to New Smyrna about 1923. At that time, we had an older sister, Edna, and my older brother, Arno, and then about a year later I was born, and then about 2 years later my younger sister Evelyn was born. So he came down here in about 1923 and was employed at the Florida East Coast as a machinist here in the shops.
Oh, so he was a shop man.
Yes.
Very good. Well, you were born in
24, March 1924.
So a year after they get here,
Yes,
you arrive on the scene.
yes.
Now, what was your childhood like here?
Well, probably a couple of years after I was born, my father bought some land there on Jungle Road. He came from a farming family, and he was really a farmer at heart. I don't know how in the world he did all the things later on that he did, and also working on the railroad 7 days a week, which they did in those days. You know, it wasn't a 5 or 6 day job, it was a 7-day-a-week job. And so he did a lot of things. So he brought the land, and of course, started building a home, and he always had a garden. We had chickens, we had turkeys, and later on we even had about 14, 15 head of cattle and had a little a milk rally. I went with my mother before school in the Model A, and we delivered the milk into town here with about 25 customers, probably about that size. And so he did a lot of things, and of course you had no fence laws in those days. You know, you had a cowbell on one of the cows, and if they didn't show up in the afternoon, why we had a couple of horses, and I had my own horse, and so we saddled up the horses and went and found the cows and herded them in, brought them in home. So I had a great childhood. Like I said, I had my horses, and I belonged to the Boy Scouts, and we had our camp out on Spruce Creek. I understand it's there just east of where that rest stop is. It's closed.
Oh,
Carl
yes.
Eubanks told me about that. He was one of them, and so we had a nice campsite there. And so we had a great life. Had the river, had the beach. I had a great life as a child. Camped a lot.
Now, when you became a teenager, or just before you became a teenager, the Depression really hit hard, didn't it?
Yes, my daddy was one of the fortunate ones. He had a job on the railroad, but there was a lot of folks around that did not have jobs. You know, it was a terrible time, really.
Do you have any idea about how much your father made a week when he worked on the railroad back in the 20s?
As I remember, the railroad engineer court paid every 2 weeks. As I remember, he and my mother talking about the finances, which any family did, you know, payday time. We was talking maybe in the neighborhood of about $90 in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was a significant salary
Yes,
for
so
this.
we managed fairly well for having 4 kids. You know, we really didn't go hungry or anything. We had, but like I say, we had a garden also. We had sweet potatoes, beans, peas. Then we had fresh milk. We had butter, and so we did very well.
Very good. Now, you have an interesting story to tell when you get to be about 12 or 13 years of age.
Yes.
Didn't you get a job Now, this is in the middle of the Depression when you're that age, right?
Yes.
We're talking about 1934, 1935?
Yes.
You're about 12 years old, and
Yes.
you,
In those days, in order for kids to get a little spending money, they collected like milk bottles and the little ones. And you remember poor boys when they had their ice cream parlor, you know, they had the little pints and of course with their name on it. You did little things like that and you maybe, you know, got a couple of pennies for those. And that's the way you would accumulate enough money to go to the movie, you know, something like, I think it was 10 or 12 cents or something in those days. And so I was, like I say, I've told you before, looking back on those years, I became like a 12-year-old financier. This mom and pop operation, Mr. and Mrs. Bob and Ann Berg ran this little store there on West Pine Grocery on the old Pioneer Trail now. The building's still there, but of course it's not a grocery store anymore. But anyway, it was a mom and pop operation. They lived in the back of the store. And they took a liking to me. They had no children, so I became one of the family. And between the three of us, well, we ran the business. And of course, after school, I did all the mowing around with one of the old push-type mowers and trimmed around the fence line and the pole. And like I tell you, I got a flat rate for that. I got 75 cents for that. And it probably took me a couple of days to do it. Hope it didn't rain, you know. And then I stocked the shelves and. I didn't pump much gas because I was too young. You had people with the new cars to come out there to get, but I wasn't qualified to pump gas. Mr. Berg had to do that until later on I got permission to do that. But anyway, I worked after school and I would accumulate like about $3, $3.25 maybe all week long. And Saturday night, well, I was over Saturday afternoon for a while, and then of course I was through and I kept my bicycle around in the garage in the back. And when I'd go around to get my bicycle, Miss Berg would step out the back door and hand me a $5 bill. So here I'd have $8 and a half, you know. If the circus was in town, which we did, as you remember, the boat races and they'd have the carnival and all that, she'd step out and give me a $10 bill, take my friend to the circus, you know, the carnival. So,
what a wonderful family.
I was very well off.
At a time when the average man, head of a household, was making about $1 a day.
Yeah.
Here you were, as a kid, with $8.25 or more a week.
Yes.
And they didn't have any children?
No, they did not have any children. And a friend of mine, his father, remember the railroad industry was seasonal. Even I was 10 years after I hired at a transportation department before I could work somewhere on the Florida East Coast, not New Smyrna necessarily, Fort Pierce or our freight yard in Bowden, which is South Jacksonville. So it was a seasonal job, and I remember I would ask my friend, boy that I played with a lot, if he would go to the movie with me, and he'd have to ask his parents, and they wouldn't have a dime or 12 cents to give him, and I'd pay his way. You know?
And it cost 10 to 12 cents to go to the movie in that day, huh?
They wouldn't have the money. Yeah. So
you'd pay his way?
Yeah, I'd pay his way, and we'd go to the movie. I had a little girlfriend there at her father was an engineer, McKissick, and she was my girlfriend. They lived for the season right there west of Sorrel, a grocery store there on the north side. And I kept my movie tickets, and I think we went to the movie 116 times or something like that.
In a year?
Yeah, in a year.
You must have been a real rogue.
Oh, man,
you had money and nobody else had any. Not kids we're talking about now.
I say the other fellow would work 10 or 12 hours at Ivy's on a Saturday for $1.50. See, and then after they closed it, we'd go to the pool room and, shoot a little pool or have a Coke or something. You didn't drink alcohol in those days. We didn't anyway. And by Sunday, they were broke, and I was standing around with money in my pocket.
Buku money in your pocket. It just jingled everywhere you went.
Yeah,
now you're
great.
12, 13 years old, 14 years old at the time.
I say I had to, starting was young, I was so little that I had to get a box to stand on to scrape the meat block to clean it, with the steel brush.
Right.
I had to get me a box to stand on to
Now, what were you, about 5'6" tall and weighed about
that, I
110
guess.
pounds?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Then later on, when I became 16 and of course got my driver's license by Mr. Berg, he bought a beautiful four-door Hudson. And one of our customers I remember that I've told you about was you remember the golf course was grass and the home that sat in the middle of it?
That's where the airport is now, right?
Yes. And I would deliver groceries out there in the new Hudson.
They could see you coming, huh?
Oh, boy. That was a great life.
Oh, that's
And of course,
good.
I had my horse, and I rode my horse a lot after school. Yeah.
Life was good.
Oh, yeah.
It was sweet.
We had a swimming hole out there on the railroad, in that area now back of the old prison camp. Do you remember the old prison camp no? Well, it's back in there. We had a swimming hole, and we had a great time, really.
Very good.
And the beach.
So now you're in high school. Now, is Bo Doster and Haywood Paxton and Bill Wright, are they your friends? Do you know
Well,
them?
they were the older students.
They were 3 or 4 years older than
Yeah,
you were?
yeah, oh, yeah. They're in like 38, 39 class. So they're in school, but you know them. But
You know of them, but you're
yeah,
not hanging
no,
with each
no,
other.
You don't associate with them.
I think what's so amazing to me is that all of you guys, Hayward, Bill Wright, Bo Doster, and yourself, all go into the flying service,
Yes.
whether it's the Navy or the Air Force, the
Yeah.
Army Air Force, and each one of you are shot down at least once
Yeah,
and live to tell the story.
yes.
We're going to talk in a few minutes about your escapades during the Second World War
Yeah.
that I think is so remarkable.
Yeah.
But when you got to high school and you graduated in 1941?
Yeah, June 1941.
Anything that you can recall about, that's just before the attack, that September, or that December,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, June of 41. Yeah.
What was the kind of talk that the kids were engaged in, what they were going to do with their lives?
Well, of course, some went to college that could afford it, of course, and others, I liked aviation even as a child. I made model airplanes, and that back in the days they were rubber powered. You put a lot of rubber together and stretch them out. In fact, I have a picture of us flying some planes out at the airport, which was a golf course in those days. I have one picture of that. So I was always interested in aviation, especially, and I read books like Lindbergh. He was my great hero. I mean, he did a lot of remarkable
And he
things.
flew to Paris in 1927 or so?
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
you're a youngster
Yeah.
when you're conscious of
yeah,
airplanes.
I loved aviation, yes, and so that's really why I joined the Air Force. When the war started, they'd already started the draft. In fact, my brother enlisted in 1940 in the Navy after he got out of high school. But you had the draft going, and then you had the enlistment phase. If you enlisted, you got to choose your branch of service.
Oh,
If you waited, then you went to any branch that they needed people. So you didn't. So I always, like I say, by liking aviation, I enlisted in the Air Force.
well, now let's see. You graduate in June.
Yes.
Is there anything that takes place? What were you going to do when you got out of high school before the war really picked up?
I really didn't know. Mr. Berg. Now going back, Mr. Berg, he had been a tool and die maker in Chicago, and he had friends there. And at that time, the Army was awarding some contracts. They were beginning to see some build up, more or less, to aid England in their fight, mostly because we had not been through the attack by the Japanese at that time. So, not having been away from home, he got me and my friend a job in Chicago in a machine shop out in Cicero.
Is that right? So you leave here.
I went in the summer of 1941, went to Chicago, worked in a defense plant. So that was a very interesting time. Never been in a big city before, and we rode the L down to the Loop, and as it got colder, I bought my first top coat, and it went very well, but there wasn't much future there. And then as far as getting into the more skilled working, it was a local thing, you see. The people was a kind of a family affair. They brought in the locals, the friends, the sons, so we really didn't have a good chance of getting into any of the skilled training there. So we did stay until it snowed a couple of times, and I slipped down on the sidewalk, and I was homesick, and that was about November, and I had enough money to get home, so
So you
back
came,
to Florida I came.
you came home before December 7th.
Yeah, just about last of November in 1941.
Now, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, you're back home. Can you recall any of the thoughts, the shock, or any of the conversation kind of things that you engaged in?
Well, of course, as a young man, you really didn't. You knew about the draft, and you knew about some construction work going on. They had begun to expand the military. For instance, I told you that Camp Blanding was being constructed, and some of the kids' fathers here, they went over there, commuted to Camp Blanding because they could make $10 a day over there working, building Camp Blanding, which was very good. You know, it was very
So
good.
they would drive all the way
Yes.
from here
Yes.
to Camp Landing, which is 100 and some
Yeah,
miles.
carpool and go and work, you know.
Kind of like they did when the Cape came.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah,
So
did a
they
lot of
went
that.
where the money was.
Yes.
And the government paid, or the government contractors paid religiously every 2 weeks?
Yes, yeah, very good.
So it was worth,
Oh, yeah.
did they stay over there? During the
Well,
week?
I guess some did, some didn't, depending on housing, like anything else, you know.
Yeah.
I guess Stark became a boom town when that started, and housing was shortage, the room was shortage, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and the railroad began to hire too, so I hired out as a laborer
On what, the railroad?
in the railroad, down
Is
the
it?
roundhouse.
Now, what month, what year is that?
This is about, well, right about 1st of December.
Is that right? In
Yeah.
other words, before the Japanese
Yes.
attack, there was this buildup beginning to take
Yes.
place in the country.
Yes, well, I was down on a Sunday afternoon. I was down waiting to pick up my father. I'd had the car, and I picked up my father. Got off at 3:30, and I heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor over the car radio.
Wow. So then what did you begin to do?
Well, immediately the railroad began to increase their employment in all departments. So labor much, you know, I was really filling grease caps on steam locomotives, and well, labor and labor, and it wasn't much. So right away the railroad began to increase their employees in the electrical department. So a friend of mine and myself, we applied, which you could more or less bid on those jobs, and we were accepted. And so we transferred immediately into the electrical department as electrician helpers.
Now, where did that work take you?
Well, right away, we had to go to Miami, work in the shops there. Now, and I
Was
don't know
Miami
if
exciting?
in Miami, the yard then was between 29th Street and 36th Street. Big operation. We had the shops there, and also had the coach yard. All your passenger trains were brought there, cleaned, repaired, all the coaches repaired, or whatever they had to do. And then you had yard engines that pulled those trains downtown when they were scheduled to leave from downtown, which they all did, you see.
Huh.
And so it was a big operation in those days. Yeah.
Was it
So-
fun?
Oh, yeah. So began to get rail. The Florida East Coast was one of the first rails in Florida to get diesel locomotives. So they already had a few diesel locomotives. We were also getting the coastline locomotives for their trains from Washington. So we began to right away get into the electrical work on diesel locomotives, more so getting away from steam into the diesel, which the diesel, the locomotive, really electrical engine. You know,
Yeah.
the diesel, all the diesel did was turn the generator.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it was all electrical.
So being in the electrical department, he
Yeah.
was in the middle of all the new things that were
Oh,
coming
yeah,
in the rail
yeah,
industry.
yeah,
huh?
very interesting.
And there
Yeah.
you were, right in the middle of
Yeah.
that.
Now, and then you had Miller's Shop. Now, Miller's Shop was just north of city of St. Augustine, and that was seasonal also. In the summertime, they opened up Miller's shops to do all the repairs on the coaches, even engines. They did complete overhauls of locomotives, steam now. Dieselers were too new. They didn't have to do much of anything to them, but just keep what you call running repairs to diesel. But now steam, they would do a complete overhaul of steam locomotives. So they opened that up about the 1st of April, I guess, of every year. So that was closer to home. So me and my friend, we bid jobs there and stayed in St. Augustine then until October of '42, when another friend of mine decided we'd better go enlist in the service we wanted to get in rather than wait to be drafted. So that's when we enlisted in the Air Force.
So October of 1942,
Yes,
you lay down your civilian career
yes,
and joined the United States Army Air Force.
yes.
Where did they take you when you joined?
Well, we enlisted in Jacksonville. We did our basic training of about 8 weeks in downtown St. Petersburg. The Air Force took over hotels, Miami Beach, took over all of that, and other places where you had large hotels that accommodate a lot of people, because it was an absolute, just tremendous increase in all the kind of activity, building airports all along Florida. Well, you know where they are,
Yes.
Well, they were all done, and from 42 on to build all these airports so you could train pilots and whatever. So we did our basic training downtown in the park there in St. Petersburg, and then you had some choices. My friend decided that he wanted to go to air gunnery. Now, this is all volunteers. The Army Air Corps, which that was the name in those days, they did not force you to fly. It was all volunteers in the Air Force. Now, maybe later on, the ground forces, like glider troops and that, you didn't have a choice. But in the Air Force, they were all volunteers. So he decided he wanted to go to air gunnery, which they had a great calling for. And so, well, I liked mechanics, so I decided, well, I'll go to mechanic school. So he left me and went to air gunnery school, I think in Harlingen, Texas, and I went to Gulfport and in about 6 months for aircraft maintenance.
Gulfport, Mississippi.
Yes.
And they taught you the mechanical skills for how many months?
About 6 months. I went to school, had our school going 24 hours a day. I went to school at night from about 9 to 5 in the morning. Ran the school 24 hours a day.
So we're in the middle of 1943,
Yes,
and you get out of this school.
yes.
Now, where did they assign you?
Well, I volunteered for air gunnery. I decided I wouldn't go that route. You got a promotion. See? So it's all about beer money, I guess. So from a corporal to 3-stripe sergeant after gunnery school. Well, at first they would give you even staff sergeant, which was just 2 grades from master.
Yeah.
And you had men in the regular Army. I got been in the Army 10 or 12 years. There wasn't a staff sergeant, you see. So that was a great thing. And of course you got flying pay and you got the money. And so I volunteered to go to gunnery and went to Harlingen, Texas for air gunnery school.
Harlingen, Texas.
Yeah. Had several. You had one in Fort Myers, you had one in Harlingen, you had one Panama City, you had air gunner school, I think, at Las Vegas, and probably 2 or 3 more on the West Coast somewhere.
Well, what was Texas like? How long did you stay there?
Air gunnery went about 12 weeks, I guess.
So 3 months.
Yeah.
And you're shooting almost every day?
No, a lot of training and turrets and tracking, skeet shooting, riding on the back of a truck around an area and have these clay pigeons come out, learning deflection shooting, and it was real interesting, really. Then you had the mechanized with the white target and going around the track, and you had your turret guns in, and so it was real exciting. Then you had aero gunnery, went up in the back of a T6 and fired, put the sleeves from that out over the Gulf. So it was a fantastic.
So you're finished gunnery school in Texas. Now you're it's latter part of 1943.
Well, about June. 43.
June.
Yeah.
So you're finished. You get your diploma from gunnery school in June of
Yeah.
43. Well, what happens to you then?
All right, we go by troop train, like maybe a whole class, maybe 200, 250 that had finished the training. Went to what they call a replacement depot in Salt Lake City.
So they send you from Texas to Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
What happens when you get to Salt Lake City now?
Well, you're from there, another troop train ride to wherever you were going to be assigned to a bomb group, to make up that bomb group, that original members. So from there, it went to Ephrata, Washington.
Okay. And
There.
From what you're saying, there must have been bomb groups in Montana, bomb groups in Washington State,
All over the West.
all over the West.
Yeah.
So you get to Washington State, do you then begin to know which bomb group you're going to be in?
Well, that's where you got assigned to a crew, you meet your other crew members, and you become a member of a squadron and of a bomb group. Each bomb group had 4 squadrons, about 12 crews to each squadron, so that's where you met your other crew members and formed a bomb group and a crew.
Now, when you meet your crew members, how many of those are going to fly?
Well, it's 10.
10 guys.
Six enlisted men and 4 officers.
What are the other 2 guys going to do? They're going to stay on the ground and they're going to mother that plane when it comes back? What?
You mean 6 enlisted men?
No, were there 12 people in a crew?
No, 10.
10, okay.
10.
So you get your own airplane assigned to you?
Not at that time, but we did after we went back to Cutbank, Montana.
So after you've gone to Washington, you form up in this 10-person.
We went by train from Ephrata to our squadron training base, which was at Cutbank, Montana.
Now, there's a lot of mountains in that area, are there not?
Well, it's on the east side of the Rockies.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
you're out there where the plains begin.
Yeah. So we had, we were based, Cutbank's a little community, 2,500 people, maybe, but fine, friendly people. And what they did in those days, you had your headquarters and 1 squadron at Great Falls, and then you had the other 3 squadrons. We were at Cutbank, they had one at Lewistown, and I don't remember where the other squadron was, but anyway, that's where you did your training. We did navigation trips, we did aero gunnery training, we did training for the bombardier, and of course the pilots were flying. We flew alternate shifts, 4 hours each day, 5, 6 days a week, morning shift, afternoon, and night shift. And then, over a period of about 3 months, you learn to do a little formation flying with another crew. You took turns leading, then you took turns flying on the wing, and then later on, you did squadron flying, all 12 planes grouped up. Then for a final rehearsal, they brought all the squadrons together and flew around Montana there for an hour or so, like 48 or 50 B-17s.
My goodness.
And fantastic.
How long does this kind of training take place?
About 3 months.
So you're now into the October time frame of
Yes.
1943.
Yes.
What then happens?
Well, we knew we were going to move. We didn't know which way we were going, whether we were going to Europe or to South Pacific. But finally we found out, and one night we had orders to take off and go to Scottsville, Illinois.
In other words, you take the airplanes you've been
Yes,
assigned.
We've been assigned an airplane at this time, a new plane, and so we leave, with a whole group leaves now. Everybody leaves from Great Falls to go to Scottsville, Illinois.
How many planes are in this
Probably about 48 or 50.
48 to 50 airplanes, and you're flying from Montana to Illinois.
Yeah. Go
What
into
kind of
Victor.
airplane is it?
It's a B-17G. The
B-
G model. The G model had the chin turret,
Okay,
similar to what's out at the airport that we've seen.
the 909.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the G model.
Yeah. And they put that chin turret on there because the way the German pilots had been attacking that plane.
Yes, from a nose.
They,
yes,
they
from the
considered
front.
it a weakness because it only had 2 guns,
Yes,
and they could not point enough to the front.
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
Now you get to Illinois, and you do know that you're going to go from Illinois to England.
Well, we don't have absolute sure, but since you're going that way, we had a pretty good idea.
Doped it out.
Yeah,
How long after you get to Illinois? Was that Chinook Field or?
yeah. No, Scott Field.
Scott
right
Field.
outside of St. Louis.
Okay, so you're at Scott Field. How long do you hang there before you,
Scott Field, we did all of our necessary personal paperwork, we got issued any more flight equipment that we need. And being a flight engineer, I always flew with the pilots. So the pilot had to get a instrument check for blind landing, blind flying, which we got that along the way. So I'd have to go with them, with just the pilot and the instructor pilot and myself. We would go to let him get his instrument check and
bombardier and the nose gunner and the side gunners and the belly gunner, tail gunner, they all stayed home?
Yeah.
Just the 3 of you guys would be up flying, checking
Yeah.
out the pilot's
Yeah.
ability to
yeah,
do this blind flying? And you're standing close to the pilots because the engineer has to worry about the plane's mechanical capability or electrical
well, you
capability?
monitor the engine and but you're just another pair of eyes, basically.
And you man that top gun?
Yes, yes,
So that gunnery training that you
Yes.
engaged in was for a purpose?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
yes.
Now,
That was my position when necessary, but, so we come to that later, all right?
yes. So you leave St. Louis about what time?
Well, this is getting into late October now, 43, and we went on, made an overnight stop at Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
Then a couple of days, you're beginning now to worry about the weather. In late October up the northeast.
Yeah.
So after that, we made it on to Bangor, Maine. So there, they had to wait a few days weather-wise, but in the meantime, you checked all your radio equipment. You checked all your compasses. We had what he called a compass road. And you parked your plane on the road with everything working, all your electrical appliances, the engines running and everything, and it worked you around that road that had been set by surveyors to compensate all your magnetic compasses and everything. So
it really was a checkout both from all the compass?
Oh, yeah, yeah. You did magnetics with all your electrical equipment on. You made if it's necessary, why, they changed them out. If not, they would put a compensation card by the compass.
In other words, you go so many clicks to the left or to the
Yeah.
right, and that's really true
Yeah,
north or
yeah.
true, yeah, okay.
So got all that done, and I began to wait on the weather, and eventually, why, we got good weather report and made it on to Gander, Newfoundland.
So you fly from Maine to Newfoundland.
Yes. So again, weather-wise.
So you lay low for a couple of days?
Yes, several days. Yes.
Waiting for the weather to clear.
Yes.
Then you go from Newfoundland to where?
Straight across to 2,080 miles to Prestwick, Scotland.
Now, what is the range of a B-17 normally?
With what they call the added tanks, what they call a little bit smaller gas called Tokyo tanks. And when they added those, as I remember, I think you could get about 2,700 miles.
27. So you've got a reserve of about
Yeah.
600-700 miles
Yeah.
left in the tanks.
Yes,
That would have carried you on to the continent.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Were there any unusual feelings or emotions that you had flying for such a long distance over water?
Well, we were supposed to have good weather, and we didn't end up with good weather. We got in a terrible front, and had to go up to altitude and use oxygen, and we had some icing conditions, and in that situation, sometimes you would come down to a lower altitude, change your altitude level maybe to get away from the icing conditions, and so it wasn't a very comfortable flight. Terribly cold. B-17s were very cold.
The only de-icing capabilities you had were the level or the height of the plane? You would have to drop down in altitude?
Well, that helps you, but you had to de-ice your boots on the edge of the wing. But still, you didn't want to stay in that condition too long. You want to try to get out of it every time it came about.
Was icing a problem on the leading edge of the wing only?
Yes, that's where it occurred.
Okay.
And it changes the contour of the wing, and consequently, if you don't get rid of it, you
Can't
lose your
fly.
lift.
Right, you lose your lift.
Yeah.
Now, what was the load like in the airplanes? Were you just carrying your personal gear
Yeah.
and no other supplies or that kind of stuff?
No.
Okay. You leave Newfoundland, come to England. Where do you come to in England?
We landed at Prestwick, Scotland.
Oh, so you land in Scotland.
Yeah.
How long did you stay in Scotland?
Well, several days. Amazingly, our navigator, of all the navigators, I guess, in the group, was able to get us that far. And due to the weather conditions in England, everybody heated with coal in those days, and always hazy, and you had to barrage balloons over the cities and anything else that needed to be protected from dive bombers. So consequently, we were not able to navigate ourselves down to the bomb group that we were going to be assigned to.
Because of the weather and the haze
They
that hung.
sent more experienced navigators up to help us get down
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
In other words,
there.
there were these bomb groups in and around the London area where all these B-17 bases were.
Yeah, they were over any large city, not just over London or any utility or anything that needed to be protected from dive bombers. And so consequently, you didn't fly very high either because it's so hazy and clouds in there. So you flew at low altitude, like 4,000 or 5,000 feet, but these balloons are up to that height also.
Oh,
see?
is that right?
They put out a squeaky radio signal. And the louder it got, the closer you were, and you better find that thing. See? So consequently, we had to have more experienced navigators.
Now, these navigators would know how to get around
Yeah.
those impediments,
Yeah.
but these guys were normally flying bombing missions when they weren't escorting you guys down, or guys like you from Scotland,
but
right?
then, there was a lot to that, just getting to the bomber stream to leave England too. So there's a lot of navigation involved.
Okay. Well, now, you come down from Scotland to your base, which was
Bolbrook.
Bolbrook. Where was that?
Clear right about 80 miles north of London, outside the city of Peterborough, which was a very good-sized city.
And that becomes your
Yeah.
home for,
Base of operations.
okay. Any recollections of what life was like, what your reactions to life in England was like when you got to your home base?
Of course, it was always cold at that time of year, and had what I call temporary barracks, with a potbelly stove at each end. And so you stoked them up real good at night before you went to bed. I think I had 5 wool blankets on my cot. And put some underneath and some on top. And you got up and you just kind of shimmied down, so you wouldn't loosen them up. And later on I got a flu and I was in the hospital, and that was the warmest I'd been since I'd been in England. So it was different. And of course, everything was new, and you were anxious to see everything. Peterborough was a nice city. We had the Red Cross Club there, and amazing thing about air crews, when we weren't flying, we had no ground duty. It was all free time.
That's really the way it ought to be.
Yeah, and so we would go, I'm looking at my history, go 5 and 6 days before you'd make a mission sometimes on account of weather. But the weatherman was the man.
Country was beautiful,
Yes,
but it was cold.
yes, always.
Now, you're there in about what month? December?
Now, about the 1st of November.
1st of November, 1943.
Yes.
And it takes you how long before you fly your first combat mission?
Third, I believe it was 3rd of November. Yeah.
2 days later?
Yeah, 3rd of November.
Oh, they didn't waste any time, did they?
No, they put you flying.
Okay, now you're going to go on your first mission. Can you recall any of your thoughts and emotions at that time?
I thought it was going to be very easy because I believe our first mission was maybe to Emden or Wilhelmshaven, which is a seaport, shipping industry, or shipping of shipbuilding also. And we were up high.
Talk louder.
Louder?
Yeah.
We were up high, 27,000 feet. Well, it was heavily fortified with anti-aircraft guns, but it seemed like the accuracy was way off. It was off a quarter of a mile up or down. So, no, this is not going to be too bad.
That's what you were thinking.
Yeah,
First run.
Yeah.
Did you delivered your bombs on your target?
Yes. And one of my jobs was, after the bombardier said bombs away, I had to get out of my turret, and right behind the turret was a door into the bomb bay. And I had to open the door and look in the bomb bay and see if all the bombs were gone.
Not one or two hung up in
Yeah,
there.
right. And if they had been, it never did happen, but if it had been a bomb that had not dropped out automatically, well, then the bombardier and one of the armors, we had an enlisted man, we had 2 people that had been to armor school, we had 2 had been to mechanic school, and we had 2 had been to radio school. So the bombardier and one of the armors would have to come up and get out there and drop the thing manually.
Describe that Bombay area. When they had to get out there, what did they do? And how much weight?
All you had was the main beam of the airplane, really, with these racks going up. There were racks on the outside of the fuselage. There was racks off of this main beam, and you had to shimmy through there with all your flight clothing on, your parachute harness on, and all that. It wasn't easy.
What was the safety strap that you wore?
Well, they didn't wear the safety straps when they're in there.
So when they looked straight down,
You were on your own.
they were looking a mile or 2 miles straight
Yeah,
down, right?
Yes, yeah.
And one misstep.
Yeah.
And
there wasn't any safety belts.
Was there any special conversation that would take place? If you never saw one hung up, so you
No.
never had to.
No, we never had to go through that thing.
Did anybody in your group ever have to do that?
Oh, no doubt, probably did.
No conversation about what it was like to
No.
to go out on that
No.
6-inch wide beam,
No. And you had to
2
have-
miles above nothing.
And you were at high altitude, so you had a little walk around oxygen bottle.
Yeah.
Which was only good for maybe 20, 25 minutes. So you had that to contend with. You had to go out and do something like that. And you were also disconnected from your heated flying suit.
And it was what, 40, 50, 60 degrees?
50, yeah, 50, 55 degrees zero, but below zero, yeah. all the time, yeah.
Below zero.
And when we had the electrical flying suits, they were marvelous. They had the gloves, and you had the boots, you couple in, and you had your own rheostat at your station. It worked beautifully, except when one shorted out. And
Then you were one cold puppy, huh?
And it was not a justification to abort the mission, either. And we had that happen one time to one of our waist gunners.
What happened to him?
Well, there was a electric heated cover for the bomb sight. So we got that back to him, brought him up in the radio room, but wasn't much help there because the radio room had a hatch out with a 50 caliber gun sticking out, so really wasn't much help to get him there, but we got the cover for the bomb sight back to him and got it plugged in, and he just kind of stuck it behind in it. That's all it would hold, you know, and the poor guy had a mustache, and the last time, after we got down where we could come off of oxygen, I went back to take a look at him, and he had an icicle in his mustache. But he didn't.
Did he live?
Yeah.
Did he live?
Yeah.
And it was all because he had a short
That's right.
somewhere in that flight suit.
That's right. There wasn't justification to abort the mission. We lost the engine one mission, and that was justification to abort. But a heated suit going out, no.
So on this first mission, you dropped, looked out there, saw that all the bombs were gone. Now you're headed back home,
Yeah.
and the ACAC hasn't hit you.
No, we're way off to one side.
What are you thinking?
Oh, I think, you know,
Piece of cake?
yeah, won't be bad.
Oh, and they feed me, and I get paid too.
Yeah.
You were falling in love with the Air Force, right? Okay, now how many missions did you make after that?
I made 6.
After that?
Yeah. Now, I missed one because I was sick with the flu, so the crew had made 7. The pilot had probably flown one as a co-pilot, which was normal. So he had probably his 8th. One of the waist gunners. Well, in fact, this one that had his suit shorted out, he flew another mission with another crew. So it was kind of a mixed-up deal there really at the last.
So now we're on, did anything unusual happen on any of those flights that you can recall?
No, they all went very well. In one mission we lost one engine and of course aborted. But otherwise,
Did you take any flack of any
No.
consequence?
No, I didn't see any planes go down. I didn't shoot at any planes.
You didn't shoot at anybody?
No.
And you didn't see any of your compatriots shot down?
No,
So
Because-
you're on your 8th mission now?
6. Well,
6th?
yes, my 6th.
What mission was it on when your plane gets shot down?
It was on the 6th.
On the 6th mission?
Yeah.
Where were you going?
Well, we were going to bomb an airfield at Bordeaux, and then the secondary was an airfield at Cognac, France.
Okay, where is Bordeaux in France?
Bordeaux is down south, the south part of France.
Southeastern part of France?
Well, really, it's a seaport, but the river to it is about 100 miles long.
Okay, so it's down towards the Mediterranean?
Yes, towards the Pyrenees, probably about 100 miles from the Pyrenees, here on the
East of the-
Atlantic coast.
Oh, on the Atlantic
Yeah,
coast?
oh, yeah.
Okay, so you're headed for Bordeaux.
Yeah.
What were you supposed to be bombing there?
An airfield.
An airfield.
Yeah.
You're going to knock out the Germans' ability to use that
Yeah,
airfield.
it seemed like they were, our story was that they were causing the planes that flew probably between England and North Africa. They were attacking them a lot, so they were going to take care of them.
What happened?
Well, it was a maximum range mission to begin with. Our bomb group put up 34 B-17s that day. And supposedly it was supposed to be what they call a milk run, an easy mission. We're going to dash in from the coast and bomb the airfield and dash out again. The group commander led the group. Squadron commander flew co-pilot. And so when we went in, we got attacked by a few planes on the way down, nothing serious, a few passes at us.
Were you shooting at them at that time?
Well, I did, but I did a lot of tracking. The problem with a turret, if the plane came in or you saw it was in too close, your turret wouldn't go fast enough for you to frame him up. Now, we had a reflector type sight. We knew the wingspan of the German planes. you had a red horizontally, and you had two vertical, and you put the horizontal through the wing, and you brought in the verticals to the wingtips. And then this sight would compensate deflection and all of that if you could keep him framed. But it was in too close, and it wouldn't go fast enough. So what I did, by being in the top third, I could search 360 degrees, and of course to the outside of the group. I would call off the planes for other gunners in our, showing whatever position they were, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock high, or whatever. I did a lot of that if I could not track him, which was much the case sometimes. And so I did that mostly that day, rather than really ever shooting at a plane.
So the gunners that you're talking to are the gunners on your own airplane?
Yeah.
The belly,
Yeah.
the tail, the side gunners, the nose gunners?
Yeah.
You're telling them 12 o'clock high,
Yeah.
2 o'clock,
Yeah.
and they would then understand where to look
Yeah, everything was done by the clock.
by the clock. Okay. Now, you're running along towards Bordeaux.
Yes.
Where were you hit? Before you made your bomb run or after?
Now we get to Bordeaux, and Bordeaux airfield is clouded over. So you can't drop bomb blindly in France due to the civil population. So we had to pass Bordeaux up and go to the secondary, which is the airfield at Cognac, French, about 70, 80 miles north of Bordeaux.
So you've made a turn, and you head towards Cognac.
Yes. Now, years later, some young people did our history of the bomb group, and spent a lot of time doing research on that particular day because we had such a bad day, the 351st.
The weather was what made it bad?
No, it wasn't the weather, it was anti-aircraft fire.
Anti-aircraft fire.
What happened, we made our turn, we read that we also had a very strong headwind, and it cut our speed down to a little over 100 knots.
Which is about 115 miles an hour.
And
Ground speed?
For an anti-aircraft crew, that's probably like standing still.
Oh yeah, that's set and duck.
In addition to that, they claimed that we flew over a flak train that was en route from Saint-Nazaire to some point.
That's on a train, on a freight.
flak yard. I've never seen any details or drawings of a flak train, but I knew they existed by reading all these years. They did have them. And of course, our intelligence people wouldn't know anything about anything like that.
Because it's moving all the time.
Yes, it could be. But anyway, when we flew over that flak train, they worked us over thoroughly.
What do you mean worked you over?
Well, anti-aircraft.
Okay, now what happened? Your planes, other planes?
Was intense. I mean, it's accurate and intense.
You're standing up in the top,
Yes.
and you're looking out over the flight.
Yes.
You seeing planes get hit and go down?
Well, it got hit, damaged. They were still flying, but not to the point where they just exploded or anything of that.
What's going through your mind when you're seeing this?
But, we can't stay on this much longer.
Well, in other words, hey, Skipper, you're going to get us out of this?
Yeah.
What can he do? He can go up or
No, couldn't do anything.
couldn't do anything?
No.
He has to keep on keeping on, right?
Yes. Probably, I would imagine we wasn't in that barrage more than 3 or 4 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But if you take, and I've seen the sites at Royan, which I was over there 5 years ago, and the guns were in batteries of 4, and each gun could put up about 20 rounds a minute. So you see 4 guns could put up 80 rounds a minute at you.
How high are you flying at the time?
Well, we're flying too low, around 18,000 feet.
So you're up about 3 miles.
Yeah, but the accuracy seems to increase tremendously from 20,000 down. You get up above 20,000, seems like the anti-aircraft or ranging devices they have begin to have or be more inaccurate.
Well, there's the delay in time to get up to where you were when they shot. You're moved.
But that was the first time we ever heard the explosions over the roar of the engines.
Okay.
Once you could hear the explosions, it was very, very close, 30, 40 feet.
What caliber ACEC are you experiencing? Do you have any idea?
Well, 8.8 centimeter. It's around 3 1/4, 3 3/4 inches
Diameter.
About that.
Okay.
Yeah, about that way.
And they come up and they're set to explode at a certain altitude.
Yes.
So if you're flying along at 18,000 and they're set at 20,000, all they do is go through your ship.
Yes.
And then just rain down a series of shrapnel.
But they would fire. Oh, they would explode above you. They would explode at your level. They would explode below you. All around.
All around.
But anyway, we lost 6 planes in the target area, including the colonel and our squadron commander. 2 crews had damage, but they tried to get back to England, but it still was a maximum range mission, and they had to ditch off the Guernsey Islands.
Guernsey Cow, I think, is named after that island.
It's flashing.
Okay, you got a couple minutes. You have gone the maximum range.
Yeah.
In other words, what is that? 1,000 miles, 1,300 miles out, 13 back,
Probably in a range maybe 9.
9. You're not carrying those fuel tanks that you use to come across the Atlantic, right?
Yes, they're installed in the plane. Yeah.
Are they?
But depends on power settings.
Okay.
Depends on whether you have to use
It's the
maximum
load
power,
that you're carrying then.
Depends on what you have to do en route.
Headwinds,
Yes,
how much time you had to spend
right.
circling to queue up.
You can use a lot of fuel.
Okay, you're on this mission. You're headed for Cognac. The flak is coming up like crazy. Your plane gets hit. Is it before you drop your bombs or after you've dropped your bombs on your secondary target?
As I remember, it was right after we dropped our bombs.
So your plane leaps up in the air because it's now carrying a lot lighter load.
Yes.
And the pilot begins to turn. Does he turn to the left or to the right usually?
Well, in this case, of course, you're in tight formation. You go with the leader, and as I remember, would have to do a left-hand turn to leave the area and go out over the ocean, and then you would do another turn to the north to go across the Brest Peninsula to get back.
Okay.
We came across the Brest Peninsula on the downward trip, so we'd go back basically the same way.
Okay, now you've dropped your bombs. How long after that before you get hit?
Probably down to just minutes. Just minutes.
And what kind of an injury or wound to the plane was it?
We sustained damage to the underside of the wing, the number 3 engine. And the ball turret gunner thinks we're on fire. But I think what happened, it damaged the area where the exhaust comes into the supercharger. So when you do away with all that, the fire is just coming out of the engine stack, really, exhaust stack, you might say.
Right.
So in the meantime, the 2 pilots and we're up there with watching them to stop the engine. You have to have at least 40 pounds of engine oil pressure to feather the prop. Now, when you feather the prop, you turn the blade into the wind so that it will not windmill at a slow rate.
And provide a humongous drag on that
Yes,
side of the plane.
And so we lost the oil pressure and could not feather that number 3 engine, and consequently it started windmilling at a slow rate, created a lot of drag, slowed us down enough that we had to drop out of the formation. It also caused a lot of vibration, and eventually I think I heard the nose gears in the engine break, because it's windmilling, the engine is dry, has no lubrication. So that's one thing that could happen, or it could catch fire even, create enough heat inside the engine to cause a fire or whatever oil was in it.
Now you're making your way back towards the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes.
How far away is that?
Not very far.
Can you see it?
Yes,
You can see it.
yes,
And you've got this engine that is now really behaving badly.
yes.
And you've had to drop out of the formation.
Yes.
Where you're becoming a sitting duck for the
Yes,
fighters.
Yes, we're on our own at that time, and the pilot and the navigator began to make a determination whether we should try to get back or do something else.
So what
Right.
happens, what kind of a decision do they make?
Well, the pilot decided that we can't get back.
Can't get back.
So then you had to make a choice whether you're going to get out over land or whether you're going to go and ditch like two crews did and take your chances in the very, very cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, which was, they always said, about 52 degrees year-round.
So what's going through your mind as this decision? Do they ask you anything?
No?
You can hear them talking back and
Oh,
forth?
yeah, everybody's on the intercom.
Everybody in the crew is listening
everybody
to this
hears the
exchange.
situation, and the pilot decided, well, we can't get back, so let's get out.
What altitude are you at?
Down around 10,000 at that time.
So you're up about 2 miles,
Yes,
and you can see the ocean ahead of you.
yes.
And the other airplanes are
They're
quickly
gone.
going out of
Yeah,
sight.
Yeah, yeah. They don't wait for you. No, they don't try to help you that way.
Okay, now what happens?
So we still could see we were over land enough that we could jump out, and so we proceeded to leave the plane. I counted everyone from the back. They came up and went out through the bomb bay.
Is that right? What do they do? Sit down, put their
No.
dangle their feet over the side?
No, you had this main bar in the center, and you had a kind of a footrest on the outside, and it was close enough that you could put one foot on each place, and then you brought them together and dropped out.
That kind of is a scary
Yes,
thing, isn't it?
yes.
Now you got just one parachute on or two?
No, just one.
Just one?
Yes.
Backpack?
Chest pack.
Oh, a
Just
chest pack?
Yeah. You
Oh,
kept your
boy.
harness on at all times, and your pack is laying on the floor.
And when that baby goes out, that can break your back. That snap, right?
Oh, yes, you kept your harness very, very tight.
And you keep in a tight parachute
Very uncomfortable.
position, huh?
And they told you one reason for that is if you don't, and you have to jump out, when you hit the ground, you're not going to be trying to hide. You're going to be trying to find a hospital to repair some damage.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're at about 10,000 feet when they start jumping out?
Yes,
2 miles high?
yes,
Wow.
yes.
Now, you've had the tail gunner come and jump. You've had the two side gunners come and
Yeah.
jump.
Okay.
Who else is back there?
Well, the two waist gunner, the ball turret gunner, and the tail gunner.
Okay, so there are 4 guys.
Yeah,
Now,
the radio operator.
and the radio
Right.
operator goes.
I'm the number 6 man.
You're the 6th guy to go.
Yeah,
Then comes the bombardier and the navigator,
yes, I assume, yes. They would
and
jump
then
in.
the pilot and the co-pilot.
Yeah,
Everybody get out of that plane?
yes, everybody got out of the plane, yes. All the
When
ships
you
open.
jumped out through the Bombay doors, can you recall your reaction? What were you thinking? What did you see?
Well, the most surprising thing was suddenly in total silence. You've been in the airplane now for 7 hours, maybe 6 to 7 hours, with the roar of the engines, and instantly you're just falling into your silence.
It's kind of like turning a light switch on and
Yes,
off, isn't it?
yes.
Could you see that airplane go on down and crash?
No. When you leave the plane like that, you've got a new set of problems. And you don't worry about what happened to the airplane.
Can you see your other,
I did see, I counted, I think 5 in the air at the same time. The others I jumped out before I did.
how far did you fall before you pulled your ripcord?
The Air Force lectured to you. Didn't get a lot of instructions in parachute jumping. They did tell you, you know, to the closer to the ground that you could get or delay your opening of your chute, the better off you were. You had a better chance of hiding, you had a better chance of getting away and all that, but that's very difficult to do. I might have fell 1,000 feet maybe before. That's hard to do.
You're still 1.5 miles,
Yeah.
1.75 miles up in the air when your chute opens.
But I don't think it took me more than about 4 minutes to get to the ground.
Okay,
You're coming down at a very fast rate.
okay. When your chute opened, can you recall what your thought process was? Were you pleased? Were you relieved?
Well,
were
in a
you
way,
shocked?
yes. You were certainly relieved from the moments that you, in the terrible anti-aircraft fire that you just come through. You were relieved, and you tried to pick out points on the ground that would help you. You tried to think of all the things that the Air Force had lectured about in parachute jumping. Your mind is racing. It's not, you're just thinking, it's racing.
What time of day is it?
Oh, it's an early afternoon, very bright, sunny day.
Kind of like today?
Yes, and of course they lecture to you to always land facing downwind. Well, you can determine that by spreading your feet a little bit and looking at the ground. And you can tell the ground's moving this way, it's moving this way. So I managed to do that. You could twist the shrouds a little bit, but you're very afraid. You don't disturb those shrouds very much. So I was able to do that, get such a way where I was facing downwind.
Did you have to go to the bathroom?
No, it wasn't a problem at that time, but I think you're in mild shock.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was in mild shock.
This is the very first parachute jump you've ever made in your life.
Yes,
You don't have any parachute training before now.
no.
Do you have any idea how you're supposed to get your feet and legs and so forth arranged so that when you hit the ground?
Well, I read other stories, many stories, in fact, where crew members came down in trees, came down on top of buildings, came down on streets and concrete, and you hit a very hard, and you don't have anything to gauge your descent. And if you come down, well, it came like area about like Sam Sewer. No tall buildings, no tall trees. You can't determine your rate of descent. And you're coming down at a very fast rate. And you'd be looking down at the ground, and the next second you hit it.
You weren't frightened though, were you?
No, but...
You were glad to be alive?
Yes, absolutely.
Were you thinking about what's going to happen to me when I get on the ground?
Yes. Naturally, you were thinking about escaping, not getting caught, and of course, prisoner of war camp. And that because you didn't know when the war was going to end. Naturally, if you're taken as a prisoner, why, until then. You had people, from North Africa been in prison camps 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Is that going through your mind?
Yes. So the next thing was try to hide. Luckily,
So you get on the ground.
Yes, luckily I came down in a rural area.
Did you hit hard or soft
Yes,
or what?
Well, it was in soft ground. And
Plowed field?
No, it was grassy, kind of almost a marshy area. It was close to the bay, and you have a very high rise and fall of the tide in that area, like 18 or 20 feet. And you had these drainage ditches. At that time, it's the low tide, I could tell, because there'd be a small stream of water and then a flat on both sides of mud, you see, so I determined it was low tide. So you're worried about maybe coming down in one of these drainage ditches or even the bay, but luckily I came down in a nice soft area, soft ground, and The next thing was,
You didn't break any bones.
no.
Didn't
No,
rip your clothes badly.
No, just landed hard.
Just landed hard.
Yes.
How long did it take you after you got on the ground and realized your legs weren't broken, your arms weren't broken, your neck wasn't broken, your back wasn't broken,
Well-
before you began to collect yourself and come out of shock?
Well, I got rid of my parachute and your flight gear, helmet. I made a mistake and threw away my gloves because they were wet. While I landed on the ground, it was a little bit marshy and a little bit damp, and so I dropped those also. I shouldn't have. And my fleece lined boots, dropped those, and just tried to get away from the area.
You say you dropped your fleece line boots. What were you wearing? And you
I had my regular GI shoes under those.
Okay.
Yeah. That's another thing. The officers could wear low-cut shoes. So one of the first things they told the officers, do not fly wearing your low-cut shoes, because if you have to bail out, you will lose your shoes.
So you've got how? Ankle high or the 11-inch high boot?
High top.
High tops. So you got rid of the fleece line boot was an over boot.
Yes.
So you get rid of all of that stuff. How did you get rid of it? Dig a hole, bury it? What?
Just dropped it.
Just dropped it and walked away from it.
Yes.
What did you do then?
When you hurry to get out of the area, what you wanted to do.
Now you're near the sea, near the ocean.
Yes, a marshy area, but not more of a bay rather than the Atlantic as we know it here.
How do you know whether to go north or south?
I didn't. I picked out some landmarks on my way down, and when I got on the ground, I couldn't see them. So it didn't help me a bit. And I was confused. Really, I was going the wrong way temporarily there for maybe 30 or 40 minutes before I was going toward more marshy area, and until I heard a vehicle. And no doubt the Germans were out looking for air crews, because I didn't know how many planes had been lost. And afterward reading our history, there were 6, and you're talking about, that's 60 people. And over the years, I learned where 12 of them did evade and get back to England.
Okay.
So
You went the wrong way for about an hour.
Yes, and finally I heard a vehicle and realized that there was a road in that direction, and that's the way I wanted to go. And so I did kind of get my bearings more properly and went toward the road. But in the meantime, the Air Force instructed you to stay in a rural area, which I was in. If you approach someone for help, make sure that it's a single person if possible. All right, I saw a Frenchman working in his garden as I went towards the road, and so I went over, and of course I was desperate for help, wanted to communicate or want to help. I had anything to eat or drink in probably about 13 hours at that time, 14 hours. I was wet up to my knees, and I went up to him, and he was working in his turnip patch. I don't know where I heard or learned this, it was probably in a movie. And I went up to him, and I looked down, and he looked up, and I said, "Parlez-vous français?" And he looked up, and he says, "Oui." And I stood there, and then suddenly realized that I didn't know any more French.
You shot your whole wad on that one little saying, huh? Does he speak French?
He was nice enough to give me a turnip.
How'd you clean it off?
I don't remember. I don't think I even tried. I think I threw the darn thing away. I was so upset and, confused, and you had other problems and worries, and so I don't think I even tried to eat it. But I can imagine this Frenchman going in and telling his wife later on, or I was thinking about that when I was standing around in the black night, very cold, and I was doing calisthenics to try to keep warm. And I was saying to myself, Sarge, you're really boogered up, but going up, asking the man if he could speak French. And I can imagine the man going in and telling his wife, no wonder this war not going so good. These people are flying around. I don't even know what country they're flying over.
So he just verified that you were in France.
Yeah.
We. Okay.
So-
This exchange with this farmer, did anything else happen? Did he help you?
No,
He didn't.
No.
Did he point in any direction for you to go and get help?
no,
But he didn't turn you in.
no.
So what do? You stumble off to someplace
So I
else?
just go off in my own direction, and finally did find the road. In the meantime, we have an escape kit and have a map in it, printed on silk, but it wasn't detailed enough, but it did have enough information on it to identify for a road sign, if I could find a road sign, which I finally did just before dark. I found a road sign and was able to then really pinpoint my position according to my map, and then I knew which way I should travel, and so that kind of got me on my way.
You realized that you wanted to travel south
Yes,
because the Pyrenees Mountains that separate France and Spain
Yep.
are a haven for you if you can get there.
yes,
And if you can get into Spain, you're not going to be turned over to the Germans.
right,
So you come down in the late afternoon,
yes.
and you have this one experience with a farmer, and now it's getting close to dark, and you find the road sign.
Yes.
What did you do the first night?
Well, I walked along this road until I came to my first village. I knew there was a curfew, and so I got cold feet. I didn't know how big the village was. I knew which way I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to go into the village and make a turn to the left, but I lost my nerve. I was afraid that there might be somebody on the street, German patrol. I knew they had been out looking for air crew in that area. It had to be. In fact, I heard, and when I heard this vehicle, there's no doubt it was a military, because a few minutes later I heard one of them say, "Comrade, comrade." So they were really out looking, but I don't think they looked very hard. It was New Year's Eve.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, but I lost my nerve, and I just stood outside of this little village in the night. It was a terrible night.
Did you
Dark.
lay down?
No, couldn't lay down, couldn't sit down. And it was very dark, and walking after, I knew it'd be a home because it seemed like everybody had a dog, and the dog would bark. But no lights came on, or nobody came outside, but the dog would bark until I got by. So I knew there was a house there. But it was very difficult. I learned that you had to try to get help before dark. In the first place, you probably couldn't find a house. Secondly, they probably wouldn't come to the door. So you always try to get help before dark.
So they could follow your path, because every time you'd walk past the house, there'd be a dog bark, and that dog would stop barking when he realized that you weren't really going to stay in that area.
Yeah.
And then the next dog would start barking as you came into their zone.
Yes.
How many times did that happen that night?
I think about 3 times.
Every one of those farmers knew exactly where you were
Yeah.
by the way the dogs were barking, but the soldiers didn't.
No.
So you
I
spend
just-
the whole night standing up.
Yes, just doing calisthenics, trying to keep
Stay warm.
Yeah. Till next morning.
Did you have a jacket on? How were you dressed?
Well, I wore regular cotton underwear. Then I wore a regular olive drab wool shirt and pants, issue pants and shirt. Then you had this electrically heated flying suit, which is about as thick as our electric blankets.
But you've discarded all of that.
No?
No?
And then my flying coveralls. I discarded the parachute harness, the parachute, the May West, the helmet, my gloves, and the fleece lined boots. Basically what I discarded.
So you are identifiable easily
Oh,
as
yes.
an American
Oh,
soldier.
yes, yes, very much so.
The next morning, when it starts to get light,
Well,
you are a target,
Yes.
really big
So I
time.
did get through this little village. It wasn't very big. I made my turn that I had saw on my map and proceeded along the highway.
Walking.
Yes, oh yes, walking.
In this khaki or in this
Olive
brown
yeah, olive
brown
brown.
uniform. Germans
Yeah.
don't wear brown uniform, did they?
No, they wore kind of a forest green.
Yeah. So you stood out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, well, I knew I had to get some different clothing, some civilian clothes.
Did you meet any people in that town as you went through it?
No, no, just daylight, just
Just
enough where I could see to see where I wanted to go.
Were the dogs barking?
No, didn't run into any dogs, and so I got through the little village in good shape. But I knew I had to get some civilian clothes. So on early part of that morning, I saw a little house and went up to it, and people lived. They lived primitive. I mean, it was primitive living, really. You know, cooking the fireplace, a little home, you know, and wanted to help me.
They
And
did
I
want to help you.
I traded my flight suit, the olive drab flight suit, for some clothing. But he was a little fella. And this heated suit was a pretty blue. We call them bunny suits. One piece with zippers, but a very pretty blue. And here it's too long. And here's this blue. I wanted to keep it because it's very warm, you see. And here I'm trying to cover up all that blue with the clothing he gave me. And finally gave me a scarf for here, one button. I just couldn't maybe button the coat, the sleeves are short, the pants are short. And I did have long GI socks, so I pulled that up over the blue part there. And so you know, it was different. I was better off than what it was. And he also gave me some fresh milk and some French bread, which was the first food I'd had.
What did that taste like to you?
Yeah, huh?
What did that food taste like?
Oh, wonderful. Well,
Milk and bread.
yes, that's all. But French bread was, man, a lot of nourishment, I guess, in just French bread. You know, you get something to wash it down. Why,
How much bread did he give you?
why
A
give
couple
you
of
a good hunk,
slices?
you know, a nice big hunk. You know. So that was the first food I'd had since just leaving the base about 2:30 the day before. You know,
How much
2:30
milk?
a.m. Well, about probably a pint of milk. You know.
Did he give it to you in a glass or a mug or?
A mug, as I remember. And we had a rubber bag in this little escape kit. I didn't use it but one time. I might have put it in that. I don't really remember.
Oh, you took it with you?
Yes, yes.
You ate on the move?
Yeah, I didn't go inside, yeah.
What was their demeanor towards you when they were helping you, giving you these things? Did they show any sign of appreciation or?
Yes, I think so, yes.
They didn't turn you in?
No.
But did they think you had a chance to make wherever you were trying to get to?
Well, I guess I didn't explain to all of them where I was trying to go.
Oh, that would be a crazy thing to do if
Yeah.
they, yeah.
So they were indifferent in that respect. They didn't know, what instructions I had.
But
what
they
I
just
was
knew that
supposed
you were a rabbit on the loose,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, they knew I was dangerous merchandise, as far as helping them, because the Germans were brutal, for helping anybody, any allied flower of any kind, any nationality.
So that's the second day. You get some
Yeah.
nourishment on the second day, and you
Yeah.
get a clothing that covers up your military clothing
Yeah.
somewhat.
Yes,
How do you continue then to move?
on foot, always on foot. And went on, and later that day, I saw an individual coming on the bicycle. As he got closer, I realized it was some kind of a uniform. And as he got closer, I realized it was a blue Luftwaffe uniform. And he came over and stopped in front of me on his bicycle, got off, said something to me, either in French or German. And naturally, I couldn't dare say a word. So So all I could do was I turned and pointed in the direction he was going, and he thanked me and got back on his bicycle and went on that way.
So you did all of this in sign language,
Yes.
not speaking
No,
a word?
didn't speak a word.
Didn't know a word of German?
No.
Didn't even know parlez-vous français, did
No.
you?
Didn't
Or that
wanna use-
equivalent?
Didn't want to use that anymore. So I went on, of course, very happy that I got out of that situation, and was going through, probably the next 30 minutes, going through a little village. Well, very narrow streets, and people standing in the doorways looking at you. They know you're a stranger.
They know you're not a Frenchman.
No, and they don't try to communicate. And suddenly the German's back. And
Did he come up behind you?
came up behind me and swung around and stopped in front of me. Got off his bicycle. I'm sure he was a little bit irritated. And again, he tried to have conversation with me, and naturally I couldn't speak. And all I did was kind of give him the old no comprendo sign and stepped around his bicycle and started to walk away. When a young Frenchman just standing 15 feet away on a little narrow sidewalk as such, he began to talk to the German. And so as I walked on, I'd glance around, I meant to see what was going on, and apparently they talked for 2 or 3 minutes. And the German got back on the bicycle and went back the same distance he was going in the first place. And so I went on, and in a few minutes, it seemed like everybody at that time in France had a bicycle but me, you see. I was trying to look around and see if I could steal one. But anyway, the kid caught up with me on his bicycle, and I had to take a chance. So I told him I was an American, aviator, parachutist, and he laughed. Well, it wasn't the funniest thing to me, If that German had looked at my color, he'd known I was, as white as a sheet. And the only thing I can imagine is, of all the people that this German could have talked to about whatever he wanted to talk about, he picked me, you see.
And this young man
Yes, and he thought
intervenes
that was
in that conversation and
Yeah.
deflects that guy's interest,
Yeah,
tells him what he wants to know.
yes.
He goes off, and he gets on his bicycle and follows after
And
you.
catches me, yes.
What's he say to you when
Well, we still can't
Communicate.
Really communicate, but he laughed, and that's the only reason I could come up with that of all the people this German could have talked to, he picked me. So,
And all those people standing in the doorway,
Yes.
their breath is just not able, they can't breathe,
No.
because they know who you are. They
Yeah.
know you're not one of them.
Yeah. So he rode along with me for a little bit, and then he went on, and I walked on my way.
Did you, when you were going together, was there any communications at all, any sign language?
No,
Were you ever able to thank him
no.
for his intuitiveness?
Well, you can shake hands and go through that. They would understand that. I think anyone does.
And you shook hands with him?
Yeah, thankful, and very thankful, and that helped me.
Now, that's the third day? Second day.
Second day, I guess,
Second
second
day.
day, yes.
Now, you've moved about how far in those 2 days?
Well, I would imagine I walked about 22 miles a day, maybe from here to Lamb, if everything went well, if the weather stayed.
So
nice.
you're about from here to Leesburg,
Well, I covered a distance of
22 miles a day, that's 44 miles, 45 miles. You're about to Eustis, from New Smyrna. That's about how far Eustis is. And you've walked all that distance
Yeah,
in 2 days.
yeah,
And your mind is just going crazy.
yeah,
You've had this near miss with this German.
yes,
You haven't eaten but a hunk of bread and a pint of or so of milk.
yes.
What are you beginning to think?
Well, I'm not discouraged. The Air Force also lectured the first 24 hours are most important to get out of the area where you came down, which I had accomplished. So I wasn't really discouraged. I was hungry, you know, I wanted to get help. And
no fear.
no,
You're not being
not
ruled
really,
by fear.
No, I wasn't afraid at that time. Like I say, I'd made a determination. I was going in the right direction. The weather was good, fairly warm, and it was nice and warm during the day. Of course, my really important thing was to try to get some place to stay out of the cold nights.
Okay,
Very
so
important.
it's the cold that is your
Yes.
biggest enemy and
And
hunger.
I did, man. I only had to stay out 3 nights, really, out of the 19 days. So I was very lucky.
Okay, where do you begin to get help? What happens?
Later on that very day, I took a chance and went up to the house and told them who I was, you know, American parachuters, and they took me in.
Amazing. Great risk.
Yeah.
They risked their very
Yes, they did.
existence.
Great, very great risk for them.
What did they do for you when you went in the
Well,
house?
first of all, they gave me food, you know, give me something. Most of them had chicken, they had potatoes, they had eggs, in the country now. Of course, people in the cities are the one that suffered all during those days, you see. But out in the rural area, people managed very well. So I got a pretty nice meal, and they provided me a place to sleep. And
How long did you sleep that first night?
oh, you put you in bed, boy, you didn't want to ever get out of bed. However, I always liked to get up and get going early the next day if they did let you sleep. And then I stayed there 2 nights. Then they advised me that somebody was coming. They were going to escort me on a train.
They had made contact
Yes, and they also
with the
told-
underground?
Well, no, I guess friends, but they also told me there was another American close by. So there was a lot of people helping Allied Flyers, but it wasn't an organization. Now, up north
This
of
is
Paris,
just friendly people
just
in the
friendly
country.
people, local.
French
Yeah,
friendly
but up-
people.
Up north of Paris, it's very well organized. Some of them were even taken back across the channel to England. They didn't all go to the Pyrenees. It was very well organized into Paris, and then west of Paris to the Atlantic Ocean, and some of them went back by boat.
How about your clothing?
Clothing.
Did they
I'm
begin to get
still-
you more fittable?
No, I'm still wearing the same thing. So, the man came, he's a very well-dressed individual. Had 2 bicycles, and we pedaled this is early morning, pedaled in just before daylight, maybe 2 or 3 miles into Pau, P-A-U, Pau. He went in the train station, purchased tickets. And over in France in those days, you didn't have a conductor coming through the cars like you do here. You surrendered your ticket at your destination as you went out through the station. He purchased the tickets, gave me a ticket, and I followed, not close, just keeping him in sight. When the train arrived, proceeded to get on the train. It was very crowded. We could only stand in the vestibule. So I stood facing the window. There was others there. And we traveled that way probably for about 40 miles. I got off at Saint Andre, which is north of Bordeaux. I
How
didn't
do you
want to-
know where to get off?
Well, he did. I didn't.
Oh, you just followed his lead.
Yeah,
He was
yeah.
somewhere in the car, or how
Oh,
close?
he was by me, but you didn't make eye contact, you see.
Okay, you acted like you were 2 different people.
Yeah, that's right.
Didn't know each other.
Exactly, yes, to protect them, see. And I had my ticket, and we didn't make eye contact.
Did he speak English?
No,
None at all.
no.
My goodness.
And so we got off at Saint Andre, and It was close to Bordeaux, and it was a nice platform with a shed, but the train was very crowded, and a naval officer got off, about probably the next car back,
Naval officer,
Yeah.
German naval officer?
German naval officer. So he just hung around with the crowd to see what he was going to do, and he came on, and of course everybody went through the station and went through the place there and surrendered your ticket. So we let him go first, and then my guide went, and then I kept him in sight, and I went through. In the meantime, I looked through the windows there, and the German naval officer met a couple of, I guess, enlisted men outside, and they talked for a minute or two, and he was in the car, and they were gone. So I followed my guide on the way from the station, and he did have me a couple of sandwiches fixed in a little briefcase. But he indicated to me it was his occupation, his job wouldn't allow him to be away from home more than one day. But he was a very well-dressed individual. Maybe he could have been a doctor, a lawyer, or someone like that.
Did you ever learn his name?
No,
Did you ever
No.
meet him again?
no.
Never heard from him again?
I might have met his widow when we were back. I'm not so sure, but she, you see, even between a man and a wife, sometimes to protect the wife, you did things that she shouldn't even know about in those days,
Sure,
to protect her.
sure.
So
he gets you
if
to Bordeaux.
You suddenly pass away, she doesn't know.
Yes.
So we did go to this person's home. It was a very well.
Oh, he handed you off to somebody else?
No, he just turned me loose.
He turns you loose?
Yes.
And
But
you
I
got a
believe-
sandwich?
I picked up a Shell gasoline map. I believe that family before this person carried me on a train, gave me a Shell gasoline map. It was very detailed, had all the secondary roads. There was a lot of secondary roads in France, and you wanted to stay off the main highways because any vehicle that you heard was usually military, no civilian vehicles. Everybody had bicycles.
So he provides you with
So I
a
finally got
detailed
a
map.
Shell gasoline map. It had very detailed, had all the secondary roads. And so I got along very well, traveling the secondary roads and stayed off the main highway.
Still making about 20, 22 miles a day.
Yes,
What's your stamina like? Are you
it's
beginning?
good,
It's good.
yes,
You're running on adrenaline
yes,
and a couple of sandwiches by
yes,
now.
yes.
Where do you get to where they begin to, you can rest and begin to take nourishment?
That came on the 8th day. After this, I walked on, and according to my map, and the direction I wanted to go was a heavily forested area. So I had to determine whether I could walk through there in one day. I went into this area and passed had to be a forced labor camp. It had a solid board fence, maybe 18 feet high around it. They was in there cutting timber. I did not see any of them, but I could hear them off this winding dirt road through this area. And I knew there was a lot of people in there cutting trees, but I didn't get out of this area. I stayed cold all day because I was, heavily forested. I was in the shade. I wasn't in the sunshine like I'd been. So I decided I'd better try to make preparations to spend the night somehow. So I found an abandoned rabbit pen. And it was only, the roof was a thatched roof, only about 3.5 feet high, or 4 feet at the most. You couldn't stand up in it. So I decided I'd better stay there, so I gathered up some wood chips, plenty of wood chips around, pine, and I cleared the brush away inside. And then it's beginning, well, it's not dark yet, but it's beginning to get cold because been in the shade all day, so I built a little fire in there, just enough so I didn't want to catch the thing on fire, and I sat there and hovered around that all night long.
This is then the 8th day.
Yes, no, that's after I left this person that carried me on the train.
Okay, how many days into this experience?
Probably it had to be about the 4th day, I believe.
4th or 5th day, you're staying the night in a rabbit pen.
Yes,
Not tall enough to stand up in,
no.
but you were able to bring enough wood chips to keep you up off the ground, and you were able to build a small fire, so you had matches.
A little fire there just to kind of cut the chill a little bit.
Did it give off a lot of smoke?
No, not too much. I gathered up anything else that I could put on that rather than the pine, but it helped.
It wasn't enough to give you away.
No.
Okay, now how long does it take you to get from, to the Pyrenees? Takes you 18 days, 19 days?
19 days over there.
Were there any other significant experiences on your way during those 19 days?
Yes. I think the next day, after spending the night in the forest, I took a chance and went up to this house that, looked like it might have been a well-to-do farmer. Took a chance and told him who I was. And lo and behold, he brought me in the house just like,
Long lost brother.
yes, he had no fear whatsoever of me being there.
Is that right? What was it? What went through your mind?
I was just, just so surprised that I would get any kind of reception like that. Right away, got the wife cooking some potatoes and eggs. He reached down in the cabinet and went
Cognac?
to this called for a drink, and he got out the nice bottle of clear stuff. Well, boy, I don't know what it was, but here I hadn't eaten anything, you see, and had to have a drink. And so, naturally, he poured a drink, and I didn't want to offend anybody, so down it went.
You all at one shot?
Yes, all of it. Well,
It was a 900 proof, right?
Couple of drafts, and in the meantime, a neighbor comes over. Went through the same procedure. Glad you're here, son. Another drink. So, in the meantime, I still hadn't eaten yet, and I began,
You say, I can't take any more of this. I'm just a kid.
I'd be on the floor. And they laughed, and they were too good natured.
Is that the sign you used?
Yeah, and so I had some food there, and I didn't stay at that man's house, but the neighbor took me over to his place.
How far away?
Oh, I don't know, half a mile, something like that. Like he had a much smaller, like he might have been the tenant or one of the employees.
One of the managers, yeah.
So put me to bed. Boy, man, I'm full of eggs and potatoes, and I've had 3 or 4 good shots, and I always like to get up early and get going, and they didn't disturb me, and it must have been 9:30 or 10 o'clock next morning before I woke up, and got me on my way that way.
Did your muscles scream at you? Did you fall through the mattress? Can you recall what your physical...
Well, no, I guess I was really in good physical condition. What happened later when I finally I didn't want to take my boots on, and usually when they let you sleep in the hayloft, I'll tell you about that. One other time, I stopped, and the man put me in the hayloft. I fell asleep. Next thing I know, he's there with his lantern light, shaking me. And I came down the ladder, went out the door, and I'm looking around for daylight. There wasn't any. I went in the house, I looked at the clock, and at 10 o'clock at night, the wife, she's cooking, I think, potatoes. And man, right away I realized they were going to give me something to eat and kick my butt out.
Oh, is that right?
Put me on the road. Well, I knew it was a curfew, and I'm sure he did. But anyway, he and the wife were probably scared, very much afraid.
Sure, you
And
can
so
imagine.
they were going to,
It was life and death for them.
put me on the road. So, before, sometime previous to that, I'd stopped at this one place, and she was a school teacher. I was stayed out in the bicycle shed while she came out and talked to me, and she could talk a little English. And gave me a little French-English dictionary. So immediately I got that out. And I began to go through it to find the proper words, and finally convinced him that due to the curfew and all that I shouldn't be leaving this time of night. So I finally convinced him, and he and his wife talked about it. That looked what it looked like, and so he carried me. His home was kind of built on a little incline with a so-called garage down below. So, and he had an old car on blocks. So we took the seats out of the car, the rear seat out of the car, and he gave me a blanket, and that's where I spent the night there. And I was
So you came from the barn
yes,
to the house
and
to
the
eat
house,
and spent the night in the garage,
Yes,
laying on car seats?
yes.
Okay.
And I was so happy. The next morning, I looked around, and it either had been a light snow or it was the heaviest frost I believe I'd ever seen. And so I was so happy that I didn't have to stay out.
But you got on the way
Yes.
right at daylight.
Yes. I always like to get going early.
Now, any other experience along that 19-day journey into Spain?
Except on the 8th day, when I stopped, again, you had to take a chance in talking to people. This was a young couple. They had decided previously that if any allied person came along, they would help, and they took me in and fixed me up with some nicer clothes, which are in the pictures. And then we began to travel by bicycle.
We
That's he and his wife.
and you,
And me.
3 of you.
Yes. We began to travel then over closer, always going further south. But the way I had been walking, probably about 70 miles from the Pyrenees, the Air Force didn't tell you how high the Pyrenees were. And the way I was traveling, it was toward more of the middle, and that was the highest point. The Pyrenees seemed to be low on the Atlantic side and the Mediterranean side. And here one nice day, a little rise in the road here, and I could see snow-capped mountains, probably 70 or 80 miles away.
I bet your heart jumped right through
It
your...
did. I mean, boy, my morale just went down to nothing. What to do? I mean, how do you get over those, you know? So after that same day, I stopped that these young people took me in, gave me much better clothing, and then we began to travel. She was about 4 months pregnant, and we traveled over to his mother-in-law's place. And so we stayed there about maybe from here to DeLand. We rode on bicycles. And then I stayed there 2 days, and on the morning of the next day, we again traveled by bicycles, just him and the husband and myself that time. And we met another friend.
His friend?
Outside of one of his friends, outside of Orthez, which is a big city, at a bridge on the outside of Orthez, France. And he escorted us through downtown Orthez, big city square.
How'd he do? What did he call ahead to this friend? How did he get that friend to come and meet you? Do you know?
He did it.
He did it, but you don't have any
No.
idea how he did it.
No.
But here the 3 of you are
Yeah.
pedaling right through town.
Yeah. And hundreds of other people going to work. It was a proper time to do it because everybody's going to work. And here's several hundred Germans in ranks in the city square. And later on, years later, I learned that it was like a regimental headquarters. So the town was full of Germans.
It was better you didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
And you just
But
kept
I
pedaling
could-
on
I
like
could
a...
reached out and touched some as I went by, but we kept our escort in sight. That's all we did, and went on through the town, and we came to a point, and then he turned me over to some other people. Still traveled by bicycle, always going south.
But you are now inside the
Yeah.
organized
Yes.
E and E people in France,
Yes.
southern France.
Yes.
You're not ad-libbing your way anymore.
no.
They are now escorting you.
Yes.
And if I heard you rightly, they're the two of you, the one that you travel with his husband, the husband and wife, and he calls a friend or somehow gets in touch with him and he meets you at the city limits and you go through town, but he's a distance ahead of you?
Yes, yes.
And you're just keeping
Just-
him in
just
sight.
keep him in sight,
And that's how you make your way through the town.
yes,
Now you get on the other side and they hand you off to
Yeah.
another party.
yes.
What were those people like?
They were young men on bicycles again. We traveled on bicycles.
How old were they?
18, 20. You have to wonder, what their status was as far as labor camps and things of that nature.
But they're little
Yeah.
younger than you are.
Yes.
You're an old man with them, huh?
But
In your
now
20s?
I'm 19.
Oh, you're 19.
Yeah.
You're just a kid. So you guys just look like you're just saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with
Yeah,
you.
yeah. See, I probably passed by, before I was probably another French teenager.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's your youth that is also working in your
I
favor.
think so. Yes.
Sure.
I think
Sure,
so.
you're just a kid.
Yeah.
And you're,
I'm too young to be in the military,
yeah, sure.
so I think it helped a little bit.
Yeah. And how tall are you and about how much do you weigh at the time? Do you know?
About 145, 5'9.5".
Okay, so you're about the same size as a Frenchman at that time.
Yeah.
Now, they take you to where?
Well, you're getting out of the large cities at this time, more to the rural area.
But you can see the Pyrenees Mountains in the distance.
Yeah, small homes, individual homes now.
Secondary roads.
Yes, well, on the highways, we walked, when we got on down into the mountains, you had to walk into the mountains then, and we did that on foot at night. Turned me over to family or up in the mountains, but you talk about primitive living.
French hillbillies.
Yeah, that's about what it meant. They were smugglers.
Smugglers. They've been doing this. They've been doing this.
They didn't let me in on what they were smuggling, but that's what they were doing. See? But I didn't care. I wasn't interested in what they were smuggling.
But they're experienced people.
Yes,
These are not amateurs.
yes.
Well, hang on. We're going to. Here we go again. We're at the Pyrenees. You're now into the hillbilly country.
Yes.
And they've passed you off how many times?
Twice.
Twice.
Yes.
Did they feed you?
Very little.
Because they have very little, right?
Yes, right.
So they're sharing whatever they have
Yes.
with you.
Yes, they will share. I always had wine. I had wine just about every stop, but seemed like everyone made their own wine. However, it rated from vinegar to fair. But you didn't.
But you were glad to get it,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
never turned it down,
I
right?
never turned it down. It was always, so very, very good to have something to wash the bread down with.
So it's basically wine and bread.
Yes.
Once in a while, there'll be some potato and maybe an egg.
Eggs, yes, once in a while. Yeah.
And you're just delighted to get it.
Oh, yes.
Now you're,
always.
what, 15, 16 days into this experience?
Yes,
And inside, you really do believe you're going to make it.
yes,
And that grows stronger every day.
yes,
And these people that are around you are really looking out for you and concerned about you and care about you.
yes,
And you're right on the edge of the Spanish border.
yes.
How do you get across the border?
Well, the last night before going over the border, of course, I was up in the mountains, and probably about 2,700 feet high where we went over through the mountains. This home was a one-room affair, dirt floor, cook in the fireplace, that type of home, very small,
And primitive.
yes, very primitive. And so I stayed there one night, and then the next night had one bedroom. Three of us just lay across the bed to get what rest that we could get. And we started into the mountains. following them, of course, two of them with their bags, small bags filled with flour or wheat, whatever they were smuggling. They never did.
They
show
were
me.
smugglers.
No, yes, they were smugglers. But anyway, typical Hollywood style, eventually the moon came up, and you didn't walk over the mountain. You walked up along a ridge, you see. You didn't just go up and down, up and down. You went up and along a ridge and walked probably the entire night along a ridge, really. But here's the moon came out, a bright moonlight night. You could hear the stream running down beside the hill, and all you had to do was just be a little cautious. I had, of course, my GI shoes, and I would hit the rocks, and they wore kind of a felt boot or slipper, and they would fuss every once in a while because I was making too much noise with my boots hitting the rocks. So over a period of about 12 hours, up to about 11:30 the next day, and in the meantime, they had hid their bags along the route, and we arrived at a point and looked down in the valley, and I could see some smoke coming up through the trees. I couldn't see any buildings at that time, but and he pointed down and said, "A Spaniard." And so I knew I was
What
there.
happened inside you?
Oh,
When you
man.
looked down in that
Man, I
smoke-filled
was-
valley,
man,
and
I
you
was
know
thrilled.
that's Spain.
Yeah, I was thrilled, and I went through the clear, shaking his hand, and I gave him a hug, and that,
And they turned you
and
loose
down the mountain I went.
by yourself.
Yes,
And they turned around,
yeah.
went back and got their packs,
Yeah.
and did whatever else they were,
Yeah, yeah.
that smugglers do.
And I've never, never seen them again.
Never saw them again.
Yeah.
Now, you come down to that valley in Spain,
Yes,
you're free.
yes,
You know you're free.
yes.
What do you do then? You
Well,
knock on the first door you come to, or?
Well, I did, and a man came to the door. I told him I was an American aviator, and he began to talk to me in English.
Did you take off your civilian clothes?
No, I still have them. I
And-
still have them on.
And you got your flying stuff underneath that?
Yes, yes.
So you can really show that you are an American?
Well, I didn't worry about that because we pretty well were instructed. If you had your dog tags, why,
You were a
all
soldier.
right. The Germans classified us. You jumped out of your plane unarmed. All right, we had style 45s, but we turned them in. You did not fly armed. So the Germans had an agreement that if you jumped out unarmed, then you'd be classified as an escaping prisoner of war.
Oh,
If you jumped out armed, you'd be classified as a paratrooper.
gotcha.
Could be shot before you ever got to the ground.
So you come and meet this Spanish gentleman at his house.
And I talked to him, he said, "I'll go with you. There's another American in the village, in the main
Is
village."
he speaking English?
Yes, he could speak English.
My goodness.
And he had to get his horse and walk with me into town. In the meantime, he said that he lived in Nevada, raising sheep, and apparently he went back to Spain maybe for a visit and got caught in the revolution and couldn't get out. Now that was his story.
Yes, well, there are a great many Spanish sheep herders in Nevada,
Yes.
Utah, Wyoming, a number of those western states, New Mexico, Arizona. Yeah, how about that?
So that was his story.
How
But
about that?
anyway, we arrived in the village, and sure enough, there was an American there named Adcock. He was a pilot on the same mission, but another bomb group, and he had walked also, but he walked straight through Bordeaux during the daylight. I've seen this road on my map, but I was afraid to travel a main road like that. He got rid of his hat. He had, we had about 40 francs, I remember, in our escape kit. He bought a loaf of bread and a bottle of wine.
Could he speak French?
No, I don't think so. And he put it on his arm and spent all day walking through the city of Bordeaux, right on to the pier. So he got there before I did.
And he'd been there how many days before you?
Oh, I don't remember, probably 2 or 3 days, but I don't
Okay.
remember.
What
But
did they
anyway, we were more or less under jurisdiction than of the Spanish Border Patrol.
Yes.
I'd gone to intelligence briefings. You didn't have to, it was voluntary back in our bomb group, but I always did. And the Spanish authorities were giving our enlisted men a hard time. They wasn't treating them very well.
They do that.
They shaved their heads, they put them in a stockade, and more like prisoners. And so they were putting a lot of pressure on Spain to stop that. But in the meantime, they told us, if you get over the Pyrenees into Spain, tell the authorities there you're an officer. I was probably maybe one of the first ones to try that. And I had this typed paper that these young Frenchmen had given me, and I was supposed to give that to my authorities, and they would in turn send it to BBC. They would broadcast certain words in that. They would know then that I'd actually returned to England.
Close the loop.
And it had sergeant in it. And so some flunky on the border patrol there saw that. I said, no. And I took a pencil and marked it out and put lieutenant up above it. So that got me by that.
My goodness.
So
19 years old.
So there are other 3 Frenchmen there.
19 years old, and you have presence of mind to do that.
Yes, the 3 Frenchmen are also there. You had a lot of young Frenchmen coming out trying to go to North Africa and join de Gaulle's army.
Yes.
So there were 3 young Frenchmen there, and me and a fellow named Adcock. So the border patrol escorted us down. We got on something like what is the Tunaville trolley? Remember that?
Oh, yes.
Something about like that. About like 40-pound rail, like a snake crawl down the hills. So here we went down to a point, and then they put us on a rickety old charcoal burning bus. You have any idea about those?
Oh, yeah.
Charcoal
Yeah,
gas,
yeah.
clunkety clunk things. Under heavy escort now. I mean, about 5 or 6